both Michael Brooks and Kyle Kulinski had a conversation on the Michael Brooks show. I actually watched the entire thing live. They had this conversation because they got into a bit of a discussion on Twitter. I believe it was the day of the midterm election or the day after, because the midterms were, it was pretty mental. The results didn't look like we took the House, but we didn't know by how many seats. Now it's like plus 36 or something like that seats in the House for the Democrats. And at the time, Gillum was so close and he lost, and it was really crazy for a lot of different reasons. And Kyle was basically saying that, Gillum should not have made his pivot to the right that he made towards the end, where he started campaigning with people like Hillary Clinton and Cory Booker, and he started to state, various right-wing things, whether it be getting hard on Venezuela not using the term Medicare for all. And the code word that corporate Democrats use is access to healthcare. That's their code word, which really doesn't mean anything. And so that's what he started using, and it was pretty bad, and it didn't end up well. Now, they're going to talk here about electoral strategy and whether or not that was a good idea.
But we had a little bit of, I guess, a disagreement about basically how to interpret the Andrew Gillum loss, if I recall correctly. I think our views are actually closer than people might think. But I guess before we get there, I mean, what were you sort of thinking about Andrew Gillum, and where do you want to situate yourself in the conversation about progressive politics, economics, identity, and the future of the Democratic Party?
Yeah, so we could go in a number of directions with that broad question, and honestly, you and I could probably talk about that for like 5 hours straight.
Indeed.
But I'll try to start with the Gillum part, because that was probably the crux of our disagreement. And again, I think you're actually correct that when we nail it down, there's not nearly as much disagreement as we think there is. I think it's just a matter of where we put the onus in the conversation. So my initial reaction, and I admit that this was bad timing because people were reeling from the loss, what we thought was a loss at the time, but then it obviously dragged on. But I had said something along the lines of, it's a shame that he didn't double down on the primary strategy, and he campaigned with Debbie Wasserman Schultz and Hillary Clinton, and he rather prominently stopped talking about Medicare for all. And then there was another instance of him tweeting a few times about how we need to get tough on Venezuela, which kind of made a bunch of lefties, their eyes roll back in their head and go, oh, what is he doing? And, from my perception of it, it looked like he and his campaign made an active decision to do the standard Democratic textbook strategy of, okay, now we're in the general election. Now it's time to pivot and get serious. Now it's time to sound more moderate to reach out to these middle ground voters that we're going to need to win. And basically, what I was trying to get at there, admittedly in a clunky way because I pissed off plenty of people with my tweets, is I think that if he did double down on that, the primary strategy, that there's a decent chance he would have been able to take the election. And what I want to make clear, though, is what I was not saying, which some people interpreted me as saying. I wasn't, by any stretch of the imagination, trying to downplay the impact of what I call the TFGs, which stands for Too Far Gones, which is basically the people who, under no circumstance, would have voted for Gillum. Like that's
right.
That's so. To me, it's just a matter of where we put the onus, because I think that there are plenty of TFGs out there that you're just not going to reach. But I think the substantive disagreement that I have with many people on the left is, what exactly do we do about it? And what I say is, get the people who are gettable. And what that means is doubling down on the primary strategy, super serving the Democratic base, but also on top of that, in the process of doing that, you actually pick off many more independents and many more non-voters, because our ideas, our leftist ideas, are actually more popular than people on the left typically give them credit for.
Yeah, so I mean, again, this anticlimactic. I agree with most of what you're saying, and I think it's just a question of teasing apart some important distinctions here. And I'll start small and move to bigger, more important points. So let's face facts here. It's 2 years after Clinton. There's a couple of, there's a lot of information coming in, right? Like a lot of the polling and data on Trump voters, which shouldn't be surprising because they're basically Republican base voters, is that they are actually driven by cultural prejudices, right? And we look at Georgia, where Stacey Abrams definitely lost that race because of voter disenfranchisement. At the very least, her pool of votes she could have gotten exceeded the margins she lost by. Right? It doesn't mean, and I'll get quickly to my final point in a second, it doesn't mean for a second that we don't run on those aggressive left policies, because those are in everybody's best interest, and they are the best chance we have of getting what few independents and non-voting people there are. And by the way, they're best for most people who aren't oligarchs anyways, right? But I think that when we aren't real and honest about the level of prejudice that does drive right-wing politics, it starts to tarnish our brand with people that are actually on our team. And so that's important to me. And then secondly, I think it's also important to say we're not talking about quote unquote, this isn't Twitter woke culture to say that Stacey, democracy not functioning in Georgia is not, here are the top 10 reasons why Seinfeld is problematic. You know what I'm saying? These are serious issues, as Bill Fletcher Jr. says, of identity, of democracy, not identity. And the final point I make is, I agree with you. I think we just need to position things like single payer, ending the drug war in the right way.
So the conversation here is whether or not, the reason why Gillum lost was because of the pivot. It's sort of a weird conversation in the first place because Michael and Kyle don't really disagree on much, really, if anything. I think that they both agree that he should have ran on a solid left campaign. Michael Brooks is actually really far left. He's pretty far left, my understanding. And so he agrees with the idea that Andrew Gillum should have stayed with a strong left campaign where you actually stick with Medicare for all. You don't switch to saying, access to healthcare and different things like that. It's a dumb idea. And so that's why it's an interesting conversation. Now, this is an interesting topic because I genuinely don't know what the reason why Gillum lost was, because there's not really, so far as I can see, any polling data to prove really either way. Now, some people are saying that the reason why he lost was because of his pivot to the right that he made, and because he was, starting to campaign with Hillary Clinton. I don't know what the rationale or logic is in any way, shape, or form of deciding to campaign with Hillary Clinton in a state that she lost in a general election. It doesn't even really seem to pass the common sense test to me. So I don't know why he did that. But for me to claim that Hillary Clinton campaigning and that right pivot is the reason why he lost, there's just no way to have any evidence to actually prove that. So I'm sort of an agnostic on the issue, because the truth of the matter about Florida is, man, Florida's full of a bunch of morons, really backward idiots. And that's especially clear when you vote in someone like Ron DeSantis over Andrew Gillum, and Bill Nelson lost to Rick Scott. So there's a lot of, differing stuff here. I totally agree that Andrew Gillum 100% should not have done that pivot that he did, where he started saying, corporate Democrat talking points. I think that is just a dumb idea. I don't see what the point in doing that is. It didn't make any sense. I don't think he should have campaigned with Hillary Clinton. I think that anytime you bring back Hillary Clinton, you are shooting yourself in the foot, is what you're doing, because bringing back Hillary Clinton is such a dumb idea because she doesn't help anything. Nobody likes Hillary Clinton. Nobody's going to see Hillary Clinton campaigning for you and then go from a whatever position to I'm gonna vote for you now, Gillum. That's not how it works. You don't campaign with someone who literally lost that state. It's totally utterly abysmal and stupid. The idea is completely ridiculous. Now, I believe Michael's point of view is he says that yes, absolutely, he should have continued on the left-leaning curve instead of going to the right like he did. And I think what Michael I think says is that I believe that they have a disagreement on what they call TFGs, which stands for too far gones. So basically people who are Republicans who are not able to be won over. They're just insane. They're just huge bigots, and it's impossible to win them over because they're not running on any sort of logic. They're just batshit crazy, basically, is what they are. So Michael said it was something like 90%. Kyle said it was about 50%. It's a tough question to ask. And Florida specifically, this is what makes it really interesting, is because it's specifically Florida. And Florida has a really bad history of voter suppression that affects black people disproportionately. It just happened this time around. It's happened back in the Al Gore versus Bush campaign, or the election cycle, where they were using butterfly ballots to purposely have them spoiled. It's really bad. And so I think, they don't really disagree on much. Just sort of some little details they disagree on, but they both agree on the most important point, which is what I think is the most important point, which is that Andrew Gillum made a huge, fatal mistake in making his curve and turn towards being more right-wing rather than staying as a strong lefty. I think that messed him up. He really should not have campaigned with Hillary Clinton. I think that was a destructo disc to his campaign, absolutely. And so, whether or not he lost, but I think voter suppression played a huge part in this. It does in almost every election, but this one as well was pretty bad. Now, I still don't know whether or not that Hillary pivot was what did him in. I don't know numbers-wise because there's no data to point to that, or at least not that I'm aware of. I don't know. I don't know any data that points to that being the total demise and detriment of the campaign. But let me know your guys' thoughts on this.